Did you, even in an audition process, are they explaining or testing you in a way to see if you're going to be able to act against nothing, essentially?
Hell no.
Hey, welcome to a sad, quite honestly, a downbeat, say bonus episode, I guess, in a sense, because I'm going to play you some content that was previously published on the show in 2020. But it's a sad episode because the content I'm going to play you is an interview with the now sadly deceased Cindy Morgan, iconic actor from the 1980s who we first fell in love with during Caddyshack. She played the absolutely stunning, sexy, strong-willed, just a powerhouse of a woman, Lacey Underall, the character. And the real woman, the actor Cindy Morgan, wasn't all that different in a sense. She was beautiful, talented, and spoke her mind direct. Just a wonderful person by all accounts. And look, it's sad to lose anybody in your life. And sometimes it's sad to lose folks who you didn't even know very well, right? We hear about the passing of a celebrity, and we may never even have spoken with them, but we admired them from their work, and that's still sad. It can be quite devastating. Cindy was a little more than that because she, early on in our show, a few years ago, when I first started the show, and believe it or not, I started the show during a time when there were very few to none 1980s pop culture podcasts. Now there's just tons. And it frustrates me because, you got to compete with this noise now. Back then there was just a handful of us. And the other ones weren't covering the content in the way that I had hoped. Otherwise, I never would have made a show, honestly. I would have just listened to theirs and been a fan of theirs. What I wanted in the show, and why I created my show originally, was I wanted to honor folks from the 1980s. I didn't want to just look back and say, hey, remember that movie from years ago, and here's a summary of the movie, and here's who starred in the movie, and here's the plot. And no, I didn't want to do that. Or here's a song, and it came out. Look, we do a little bit of that as just, information on our show, but what we dig into is, how something happened, why it happened, why it's important, maybe why it's a best example of something ever, and how it continues to affect us personally or the media that we still consume today. And that's what we do on our show. Anyway, back to the beginning of our show. It was less than a year old, our show, and I had spoken with a number of folks, but no celebrities. I spoke to professors and authors and other folks, that I found locally that I knew I could get into my studio before I started doing the interviews remote. But early on, there was a handful of folks, and I had dozens on a list, but a handful of folks who I wanted to talk to sooner than later because I was really intrigued by what I had learned about their stories. And I really liked their work. And Cindy Morgan was one of those people. And even though I hadn't had much of a track record of speaking with celebrities by then, in fact, I may have not spoken with any. I think at my recollection, there was like a handful, maybe 3 or 4 folks who said yes all at the same time without knowing each other had said yes. With only knowing the various folks that I had spoken to, academics and so forth. And Cindy was one of those people. And not only was she generous with her time, she was very honest and very open. And I'm talking about before the interview when we talked, after the interview we continued to talk, during email exchanges. She was a very open person. But in particular, what I'm going to play for you today is an interview where she tells us about her career, how she got to be in Hollywood, and then the unfortunate incident that led to the demise of her film career. Now, she had somewhat of a television career after she starred in Caddyshack and then shortly thereafter appeared in Tron as well. But films for her, she wasn't the star she should have been or could have been. But for this incident that she's going to talk about here involving producer Jon Peters, who told her, and I may be paraphrasing, but I'm going to get the swear word right, so brace yourself, that because she refused to do a Playboy spread during what was a film, it was supposed to be a film shoot. It was a film shoot of a scene, in which she is naked in Caddyshack. Jon Peters brings this Playboy photographer on her during the scene and says, "Oh, you're also doing a Playboy spread today." And because she said no, he said to her, "You're fucked." End quote, according to Cindy. And, and then threatened, he literally took away, different contractual ways that she would have made money from her work on Caddyshack. And then, she'll tell the story, it went on that seemed that his threat was made true. And various things happened as a result. Anyway, so it really, I'm playing this interview because I want you to hear that story, in particular because I don't see in all of the articles that are being written about Cindy, anything. For most of the publications, you don't hear, they're not writing a word about this, what happened with Jon Peters. One speculated, well, isn't it curious that this beautiful and talented woman didn't really have much of a career after Tron? Well, why is that, do you think? Maybe you could dig a little further into it. And as Cindy says, and again, I bring this up because as Cindy says during this interview, this kind of shit is still happening today. But even the one example I could think of where a publication even mentioned Jon Peters or her, her allegations, again, you dig into Jon Peters, this is a guy who's been sued at least 5 times for sexual harassment. Most of those cases were settled out of court, it's believed. The woman actually won a judgment of $3.3 million. And she, in that case, what she said he did was all terrible things. So, and that's not alleged. That case really happened, right? So there you go. Anyway, but and even in the story that mentioned Jon Peters, which I think was from Entertainment Weekly, it was like a passing note where she's, Jon Peters said this and that, No. Anyway, Cindy here talks with us at length, and this may be the only time she spoke as much as she did about this particular matter. But she tells us about her career again, so I want to certainly make sure that's out there. And I want to make sure folks know about this thing that happened to this woman who was destined for stardom. But unfortunately, sadly, in the last few years of her life, and certainly in the last couple of months, had been struggling to find just a place to live that was safe and affordable. And again, I don't want to go too much into this right now, but I know I did a rant about it elsewhere on social media. You can find if you want. But forces were gathering against her. And even she documented on her Facebook page tweets, or not tweets, texts, where folks literally said things to her like, and again, they were trying to get her out of her apartment, I guess, is what was happening. But in connection with that, folks made threats like, if you keep texting me, you'll regret it. And one of her other Facebook posts, she mentioned something about somebody and was afraid that if they saw what she said, that she would be, I believe she says, quote, a dead person. Anyway, I'm not alleging, I'm not even alleging something happened. Nobody is. But my point is, this woman deserved a bigger career, and certainly in the very least, like all of us do, a peaceful twilight, right? All right, that's enough outrage, I suppose, for now. So take a listen to this interview with Cindy. Again, by all accounts, a fantastic woman. Certainly to her fans, talented and a beautiful woman.
Please welcome to the show, Cindy Morgan. Hey, Cindy, how are you doing?
Doing great, Will. How about you?
I'm doing well, too. Thank you for talking to us today. So our show has set out to prove objectively that the 1980s was the best decade for pop culture. Period. We'll fight your decade.
You have empirical scientific evidence proving this.
Yes, we're working on that. But we are speaking to folks, experts like yourself, who appeared in some of the iconic, media that we love from the 1980s. And we actually do speak with the occasional professor and author that gives us some more of that empirical data.
Well, to tell you the truth, it was a special time. It was a lot of the scary things had just started happening. It was right between the 50s where everything was wrong and the 60s where everything exploded, and the 70s where there was a lot of experimentation, and the 80s things started to get a little serious, a lot more serious with certain things. And then by the 90s and the 2000s, look at today.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it seems to me that, and again, we did speak with some political science professors and we spoke with a congressman even about that time, that it was It's interesting that the media seemed almost, in stark contrast. We had these bright poppy songs and fun movies where we had folks, in the middle class suffering because factories were closing.
That's right.
It's curious to me, but it seems to be the case. So maybe everything in the 80s wasn't great, but it birthed, much like in the Renaissance, some great media. But you're of a different generation. You're little bit older than I am.
Uh-huh.
So
that's a polite way of saying.
So what would you? So I consider myself a kid of the '80s. I was born at the beginning of the '70s, but I went from being what they'd call a tween now to being an adult by the end of the '80s.
And that's where you make a lot of decisions, fall in love with a lot of things. That's where you start formatting what you love, what you like, what you want to do, your avocations, possibly your vocations.
So what would you consider you to be a child of, or what was your generation?
It all blew open for me when I went to college. I had 12 years of Catholic school, very tightly restricted, and like literally every breath out of my butt. But luckily, in high school, it was an all-girls Catholic high school, but luckily I was put into AP, well, they didn't call it then, but the AP classes. So there were 30 of us together for 4 years, and we had different reading lists. And because we all were together in all of our classes, what the nice thing was, it was really hard on the nuns, because we worked as a unit. It was like that. That old movie, Starlog 17. We really had, okay, we'll do that. And then we do whatever the heck we wanted, because they put all of us together in one class. They took the top 10% of all the students. So I learned a lot about a lot of things. And then when I got to college, I actually was offered a grant from the state of Illinois to go to the Illinois Institute of Technology, and really wanted to go because I wanted for my father to become a mechanical engineer. And I walked in, and it was all guys and 4 girls, which I understand it still is. So,
yeah, unfortunately.
And I went into college with a distinct stammer. And I made a hard left, went to Northern Illinois University, and majored in, I was a terrible speaker, but I was a good writer. And the first time a professor ever came over and said, you're good at this, consider communications. I came out and broadcast. I was actually writing news professionally while I was in school.
I imagine it would be terrifying to, as you say, if you had a stammer at the time, to be suggested to go into communications. Then.
Well, I didn't think of it as terrifying. I more looked at the path. I more looked at what was right in front of me. And communications was, at that time, 3 separate things. It was the psychology behind making a speech, how to engage an audience. That's one element. Broadcasting was one element, and speech pathology was an element. So there are several elements of communications that they took apart. And it worked well with me. I came in with a stammer and came out and broadcasted. So it worked. Yeah.
It sounds like the different, those 3 different areas that you mentioned played nicely into, ultimately, I imagine, into acting, including the psychology.
Well, yeah, it actually does, because pretty much the psychology behind, I can break it down really simply with Shakespeare's friends, Romans, and countrymen, lend me your ears. Now, everybody knows his lines, but they don't know why Shakespeare had Mark Antony say that. He's walking into a hostile crowd.
Right.
Think about this in politics. He's walking into a crowd that said, we just killed Caesar, and you're his friend, and we don't want to hear anything out of here. So he comes out and says, hey, look, friends, Romans, and countrymen, I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. Of course, Caesar made all of you rich and conquered half the world, but Brutus is a good man. And of course, Caesar did this and the other thing for you, and now you can all eat, but Brutus is a good man. But so what it is finding the common denominator, in not a sneaky way, in a practical way, finding the common denominator with the people you're speaking to, because there's always a human common denominator. Heck, I was outside feeding baby ducks today. I found the common denominator. Don't chase them and throw the food to, if you can find that, that's how to communicate. Because communication doesn't mean talking. It means getting your point across as intended.
And I imagine this skill, again, with communication and like you said, finding a connection helps not only with being a better performer, but, working in the audition room. So you got some producers or directors in there. How do you connect with them to get them on win them over, I suppose, right?
My meetings are always better than my readings. Because it's such an awkward, bizarre setup. And I actually worked as an associate producer on the other side. And I always had the feeling that everybody just got there and nobody really knew what they were doing. Well, when I was on the other side of the desk, I found out that's actually the case. And the person who got the job was not the person who did a detailed study of a character. Unless they are a character actor, the person who got the job was the one who was most comfortable in their own skin. And the one who could talk, who could go through the reading with the same tone and the same energy as they did when they were just having a conversation.
Now, this is a lesson, though. You're an associate producer later, I imagine, right after you've been acting.
Oh, yeah.
So so at the time you're a young actor starting out. Was this already something that you understood or had a gift for being?
No, I never wanted to be an actor. No, I took some acting classes in college and was like, yikes, no, I'm out of here. But broadcasting made sense because it was a job. At the end, I was doing morning drive in Chicago. And I pity the DJ who came on after me because I wouldn't play crap. So I just wouldn't. I know. And then the program director would call me in and said, well, yeah, the Carpenters. I said, we're a rock and jazz station. I could hear the commercials for the Carpenters, so I could put two and two together. But no, and we got into the biggest fight because the publicist, now this is an old TV show, Beretta.
Sure.
And Beretta's bird.
Yep.
But Beretta's bird's publicist wanted to put him on my show. I thought this is hilarious. I'm going to get this bird on my show. I want to do this. And I went in and I talked to the program director, who was the owner's son. Those are tough arguments. And he goes, Cindy, birds can't talk. And I'm like, really, Terry? Birds can't talk? I said, the deal is I can do anything I want. This is radio. No. So after that day, at the end of every news segment, because I pulled wire copy and did my own news, at the end of every news segment, it would be, and today's animal story is everything. Now, the Chicago audience didn't know what I was up to, but they knew I was up to something.
You knew that by your reputation or by having listened to you?
Yeah, just by the way I handled it. And then I get called into the office every day. And I'd sit and lean in the doorway and I go, yes, Terry, yes. How are my ratings? Good. See you tomorrow.
So, thinking again about, you're talking about how acting, you weren't for it. At some point you go, I know you go to LA and among the many things you do. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It wasn't that I loved acting. I was working at that radio station with Terry, my boss. And I was making $135 a week doing morning drive in Chicago, pulling numbers against the big boys. And I got a call one Saturday and from the Scotty says, I'm taking away your overtime and I'm giving it to some guy. Mm. And I said, really? And there's a rumor that I walked out leaving a record spinning. I don't think that's entirely true, but that's what let me know that I had to make a change. And in Chicago, nobody would let me go on camera. Nobody would let me do commercials. You're the voice on the radio. Forget it. So I went out to LA and I just didn't tell anybody I couldn't act. I got an Irish. I just left that out of the conversation. I did go into my agent's office and pulled the resumes of people I recognized, flipped them over and saw where they studied. Mm-hmm. And I took a couple of those classes, which was a good thing because I lost my disc jockey voice because everything sounded like this. I had to get rid of that right away. And I took a comedy improv class and that saved my butt for Caddyshack. So I got an Irish Spring commercial about the time I got out of my car, like within the first month, which was helpful. And then in 8 months, I got Caddyshack.
Wow. Okay. So again, what I was going to suggest or ask is, you said in school acting you weren't for, but suddenly you're now auditioning, for a film that's got some huge stars in it, that were starting to break through at that time. Again, I imagine it would be intimidating, especially considering what you've given us as your history there.
You know what? For example, if I do a press junket in the city and they say, oh, let's listen to the station, they're going to promote you. No, leave that radio off. I don't want to hear it. I want to walk in, clean, do my job just like their people. So when I knew I was working with these actors, I stopped watching I wouldn't watch their work. So that I could walk on a set and there they are and there I am. I know why I'm there. I know why they're there and that's it. And it was much easier to do my job because to me it's a job,
Yeah.
And I can be all impressed about them later. Right now, I got to do my job. And Lacey Underall wasn't the kind of person who could be all impressed. She had in fact, she was quite the opposite. She was like, you're all really boring and getting on my nerves.
So when you audition for Caddyshack, at some point, are you auditioning against Chevy Chase and some of your co-stars
I had a first audition, and then the thing is, I remember reading the script. I went, "Well, I'll never get this job. This isn't me." 12 years of Catholic girls' school. Had a stammer. I was fixed up with cousins for both of my proms. I mean, okay, I got nothing to lose. I can do whatever I want in that audition. I got nothing to lose. Well, thank God I had that attitude because I was like, "Yeah, this is fine. This is fun." On the last audition, though, I started getting a little nervous because I was the only one who signed in to read for the role of Lacey. I went, holy crap, these people really think I can do this. I didn't want to think crazy. And I walked out in the parking lot, hyperventilating, walking around. I thought, all right, forget about the lines, forget about the job, just do one thing. Whoever you're reading with, and hope it's a guy, make them sweat, look them dead in the eye. And women know how to do that. And so all I focused, and I was reading with Doug Kenny. And when I looked at Doug, I looked straight through him. And when he started sweating, I knew I had the job.
That's amazing. That's an amazing lesson for probably, I don't know, a lot of things. I love hearing stories about folks who it seems like, there was a path to what they were going to do, like all those little things that the school, the stammering, communications lead you to this point where you're able to
it's
be
ridiculous.
present. Yeah.
Nobody who knows me could believe it. I mean, there's like this big gap. Like, how? So, I don't know. I mean, I look and go, I don't know how the hell I did that. I really don't.
So initially, it's surprising to me, a lot, stuff that we love from the 80s. It's always surprising to me to look back and see that at the time it wasn't as well received as it is today.
Caddyshack tanked.
Yeah, I think, I don't know that most folks, casually would think that because it's so huge now. And I really struggle to understand sort of like what the evolution of something is to becoming, from, like, as you say, something that tanked to cult status. What do you think?
There's a lot of reasons. One of the big ones, and this is the rumor and the truth is that with the exception of two people who were on the crew, right. Everybody was high every day. And well, we actually, not that I'm recommending that or advising that, because a couple of good friends died shortly. I had my agent from William Morris passed away. Wow. Doug Kenny passed away, as you know. So, I mean, it's not something I'd recommend. But the truth is, we were actually having a good time. And you can't fake that. You can't fake organically actually having a good time. And we were having the best time. I tell everybody about the piano scene. I was in a hot house in Florida with Chevy with the old giant Klieg lights. It was just so hot. They kept touching up my makeup. And Harold Ramis said, come over here and sit down next to Chevy by the piano. I said, why? Just we got to that point. Why? And he goes, just do it. He goes, say, sing me a love song. I said, fine. So I said, sing me a love song. Now watch my eyes. And he starts playing the song, launches into the song, snorts the salt, throws the tequila. And you can tell when I realize we're shooting a scene because I laugh to myself. I look down and go, oh, I get it. Because out of the corner of my right eye, I saw the damn red. I saw the camera light on. That's how I found out we were shooting a scene. I didn't know we were filming. I just thought they were being goofballs again.
Now I wonder, was that something that Chevy was in on? Was it just to get a certain reaction out of you? Whereas
at that point in time, I couldn't tell you the truth. Okay. He may or may not have been. They just asked me to go sit down, and he was going to do something. I was like, yeah, all right, And people go, oh, weren't you laughing all the time? No, that wasn't my job to laugh. My job was to be Lacey. So and quite frankly, it's like playing sports. I'm sure you play a sport or do something with games, video games.
Yeah, sure, okay, yeah.
And when you're doing it and you're doing it well, people say, aren't you having a good time? Well, yes and no.
Yes.
Yeah, kind of. But you're still working really, really hard. Your focus is 180% there.
Right.
So yeah, you're having a good time, but you're also putting your heart and soul into it.
Yeah. So, and because you didn't have, so you had at that point studied acting at least somewhat, right? Because you said you checked out the resumes.
Yeah, thank God. Yeah. Thank God I had a couple classes. I got rid of that disc jockey voice. That was one class. Right. And I studied with a guy named Harvey Lembeck. His son, Michael, is a director.
Sure.
And he was a vaudeville. He was trained by Phil Silvers, who came from the vaudeville method. There actually were comedy rules.
Right.
And if you it's like music. If you break it down, I mean, you're either funny or you're not, or you can walk in and be funny and you won't even know you're being funny. I know people like that too. That would have been Ted Knight's case. He really wasn't planning on being funny by being straight man Rodney. That wasn't his plan. But he would yell at me. I mean, I would get sick before every class because he'd go, Morgan, stop going for the joke. You're the straight. You set up the joke. Mm-hmm. And thank God he did. Because going head-to-head against Chevy would have been really stupid. Well, actually, we did go head-to-head. There were a couple of times we were fighting. And that was the best work we did, by the way.
I imagine, yeah.
Because you get your adrenaline up and your focus up, and if you play with somebody better than you, do you bring your A game or do you go home?
Right. Well, knowing what I've learned about you in the last few minutes here, I know where you went. And Harvey Limbeck, by the way, you mentioned Stalag 17. He was on the stage and screen versions of Stalag 17.
Oh, he remarkably bright and on the money, and just knew it by instinct.
What I understand of improv and what I hear you saying, and my own limited experience with that, is that what a great way to learn how to be fearless, in just straight acting.
Well, you just take that fear and you turn it into adrenaline and shove it someplace else. You drive it into the sea. Right. Use the fear. Don't ignore it. Right. Use it, but use it for something you can do it with it. Yeah, it was. We never the script on Caddyshack. It was thrown away. The original story was about the caddies, right?
Yes, and based on Harold Ramis and the Murrays, and yes.
Oh yeah, and all of a sudden here come four of the funniest men on the planet. Rodney Dangerfield, who didn't really care a thing about script. What script? He just would roll through a scene like a comic juggernaut, saying whatever the heck popped into his head. And Ted Knight's holding onto the script going, "But I got lines. And Ted was legitimately angry. By the end of the film, we all kind of had evolved into versions of our characters, so the improv became less and less of a challenge because there we were.
So just a couple of years after that, of course, you're in another iconic, very different film in the 1980s. Probably couldn't have two more different, and huge, certainly by today's standards, films. You're in Tron.
You're right.
Where you play Laura / Yuri, because you're Laura in the real world, and then that sort of Wizard of Oz sort of, dreamlike version of that.
Yeah, that's the way I used to describe when I had to do the press junket. That's because I had no frame of reference. I would say it's like the Wizard of Oz. You're in the black and white world. That's your real world. And then suddenly you're in this other world, the computer world, where it's vividly beautiful. And you meet some of the people that you knew before. Because if you're a computer programmer, it picks up some of your thoughts, some of your inclinations, some of your recognitions. And it was really another reason it was really hard to do, for the exact opposite. It didn't make any sense at all.
Well, it's interesting, the way you describe Wizard of Oz, this idea we move from black and white to color. It's interesting to me that you say that, because I know that, the real world stuff was in color and the computer stuff was shot in black and white, my understanding, just so they can do those effects. It was. Speaking of auditioning, when you auditioned for Tron was a breakthrough for many things, including the use of computer generated images.
Right.
So, but at a time where, it only had been used a few times in film prior to that, did you, even in an audition process, are they explaining or testing you in a way to see if you're going to be able to act against nothing, essentially?
Hell no. No, actually, it was from Harvey Limbeck's class. I was dating one of the guys in one of the classes, and he took me to lunch at the Chronicle restaurant in Venice, California. And he was with some people because he was going to be in this cartoon. And I was having lunch, and I'm listening, and they're talking about this cartoon. And I went, oh, okay, that's great, And I went away to do Caddyshack, and I didn't work for a long time because Jon Peters made good on his promise to blacklist me. I will never blanking work again, because I wouldn't shoot the nude scene for Playboy. I just said, no, I agreed to this. I can't do that. And also, I had enough background in film just from the communication class that I knew they wouldn't get a good still for like 20, 30 years. So I said no, and they sent him anyway, screaming and yelling. And I didn't work for a long time afterwards. And then all of a sudden I get this call to go meet with the director and Jeff Bridges, who I didn't remember, and Jeff Bridges, and put me on camera to test.
Wow.
And it was terrible. It was awful. It made no sense. It was physical. The words made no sense. And I got the job. What I didn't realize was that lunch I went to, the guy I was dating, Tron originally, Flynn and Tron were the same character. This Larry Anderson is the actor, who still is a sweet guy. Like many years later, I said, Larry, was that Tron? And he goes, yes. And I never took another actress to lunch again. He was out, I was in. But I didn't take his. But that's how I got that job, eating lunch.
I see. That makes sense too, because I had read how Steven Lisberger was originally planning it to make it an animated film until he started learning about the technology that was available to make it what it became.
That's right.
And so you bring up Jon Peters, and I won't say another word if you don't want to.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. You say anything you want. I've got more to say than you can imagine.
Well, I noticed in the past you've been reluctant to talk about it, but we're living a different world now, a somewhat different world.
Well, now that everybody knows who and what he is, and it wasn't just that Jon Peters was so bad. It was that I called my agent and I said, help me.
Right.
And he said, honey, you're not a doe-eyed girl from the Midwest. Handle it.
Oh, boy.
So I came back and fired him. And he became a head of casting at ABC, and I never got another job at ABC except once when it sort of slipped through. People not only don't protect you, if you dare to speak up and defend yourself, and then walk away from them for not doing their job when they should have been sued, just walk away. They will get even with you forever. And let me tell you something. We had a little conversation about something that I won't go into in detail during this live broadcast. Right. That exact thing happened there. Somebody did something. I said, you can't do that. That's not what the contract says. And they said, I am doing that. And I said, well, then you can't be part of this deal. And they made sure that I was X'd out of the deal, which is illegal. And
sure.
Quite frankly, I don't like to sue people. It takes a lot of time. It's very exhausting. It's not in my nature, but I think there's a criminal charge.
Yeah. What happened to you, the terrible thing that happened to you so many years ago.
It's still happening today. Yeah, it's never, ever over. Trust me, the only difference between now and then is that people are being a little more careful about what they say and what's in the contract, but it's still happening today. It's in the last month. I can, not that I'll say now, but yeah, it's still happening.
So I had planned to ask you if now, with the Me Too movement, you felt somewhat vindicated or experiencing PTSD.
PTSD does come up and every so often. For example, the time I really felt it is when there was the it didn't affect women, it affected men, but it's the Penn State thing that happened about 5 years ago where the man who actually had to tell the truth because he was called before a grand jury had to leave the state. What happens in a situation like that, people think the incident is the worst thing that could possibly happen. Just so you know, the cover-up is far worse.
I'm sorry to hear that you had to go through that. Obviously, it
ain't over, pal.
Well,
but here's the thing. I went home that night when Jon Peters took away my paid ads and my billing and my agent didn't stand up for me. And I knew that I wouldn't work for a long time after I did that scene. And it was a very tough scene to do. And in fact, goofy Jon Peters actually kind of did me a favor because I was afraid of that scene. And by the way, you're never completely nude. You make friends with your wardrobe department. They'll never get the shot they want. Believe me. I know where the camera is. I know where the lights are. But he made me so angry that he took away everything I had. And I said, he broke my contract, but I knew they already had enough film in the can and they couldn't go back and reshoot.
Right.
So I walked in there and I cleared that set myself. I said, I want to see 4 people. That director, they had the old camera. So I said, that director of photography is going to be the camera operator. We need a focus puller. We need that director and that actor. And until then, I got all day. Take your time. I learned a lot of new words that day. But I'll tell you something. That was the only damn way I could do my job. Get the hell out of my set. Right. This is a job. Get out of here. And there were people behind the drapes, under the bed. It was just, get out of here. And I grew up a blue collar kid. I worked for my dad in the factory. It's the same thing. I got a job to do. Get out.
In a situation like that, I suppose you have to exert whatever power or control you can because so much of it is they're trying to take away.
And something, there was backup. I remember my hairdresser, they looked at my contract. They said, honey, you don't have to do that. The photographer was sent to this. The photographer was there. And by the way, I don't have a problem with Playboy. Playboy is a legitimate modeling agency in the city of Chicago. I mean, like for catalogs and things like that. And one of the photographers I knew is still a friend of mine. But what they were trying to do was something else and take something else. And I went home that night and I looked in the mirror thinking, okay, you just threw this all away. But can I tell you something? I could look myself in the eye.
Wow.
It was the best thing I ever did.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Well, here's the good news.
Yep.
I'm still standing and the bitch is back. How many Elton John songs can you name that will apply to this?
Speaking of great songs from the 70s, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Cindy's decided that she's firing all of her texts because she's tired of them speaking. I'm speaking about myself in the third person. That sounds crazy. I'm tired. I'm tired of being hijacked by technicians and so on and so on and so on. I've taken over my website. I'm redesigning it. And by the way, with GoDaddy, it's like putting together a Facebook page.
So in talking about the internet and how, you're taking this control over your own brand.
Yeah.
At some point, because Tron was not only a breakthrough technologically speaking, but it was, somewhat prescient as far as how caught up folks would be in this virtual world. At some point in the years since, it sort of snuck up on us. But is there at some point where you start thinking, this is kind of getting like Tron?
You have no idea how much I think about that, and how exactly it has become. Yeah, it's like Orwell's 1984. We're looking at 1984 in the rearview mirror. The master control program is all over the damn place, and that's where taking responsibility, common sense, having ground under your feet. No, it's really hard to say, I know this to be true. And this is where I can bend, but I can't bend anymore on this one because I'll break.
Right.
So you got to know how far I'm not pushy, but I won't let someone break me because that belongs to me.
Right.
So CindyMorgan.com is where you can find me. I'm real easy to find.
And so we've got so much technology now that can, again, Tron is prescient in that sense. How are you using it to your advantage now? You've got this background in communications. We've got great platforms like podcasts. Any thoughts about having a program of your own where you...
I'm glad you suggested that because why the heck not? I meet some really cool people. But one of the best things about the autograph shows I get to do is that when you're sitting on the other side of the table or you're in the green room, you meet the coolest people. Can I drop a few names? Because you're going to need a big shovel to pick these up. I was sitting at a show and I had to move a sweater so William Shatner could sit down. And there's Richard Dreyfuss standing over there. And then there's Tobey Maguire over there. And I'm just like, just breathe. Yeah, just breathe. You belong here. I don't know why, but you're here. So that is so fun. That the best, because we're all fans down deep inside. That's where the passion comes from, I think.
Yes.
You got to love what you do.
And Cindy, we are a fan of yours, and we've loved what you did in the 1980s. And with that, I will say thank you so much for your time today. Such a fun and enlightening interview.
Well, I thank you for stopping me from talking, because I'd still be talking. I'd copy.
So there you go. Now, folks who listen to our show regularly will notice, and I think I've said it out loud, but I don't. I've said it maybe once or twice. We don't cover the deaths of celebrities on our show. I don't even generally mention them on social media. When we do posts, we don't really do posts about that. Sometimes. The only one I could think of recently was Paul Rubens, because and just how meaningful and important his particular roles, especially Pee Wee Herman, were to us. So this is not a episode I wanted to record, and I hope to never feel so moved to do it again. And again, I feel loss and sadness when we lose folks like this. But Cindy's particular history, unfortunate the unfortunate turns of her career, and then ultimately her life really just upset me. So there you go. All right, hey. But I promise you, look, our show is on hiatus for January, but we'll be back in February, and I promise you that we will be speaking about much more uplifting things then. So I will talk to you next time on 1980s Now.